Hey there guys, my name is Clement from the Tech, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys all about integration testing with Node.js using Jest and Supertest. If you like this type of content, please do not forget to leave a like and subscribe because that really helps the algorithm. Now without any further ado, let's get on with the video. Now let's go on talking about integration testing. What is integration testing? In the previous video, we talked a lot about unit testing and we explored the beautiful world of Jest, but we didn't really talk much or at all really about integration testing. So in this video, we're going to go dive into that using Node.js. Let's just talk about it without going into the code for like a minute. So what is integration testing? Well, put simply, integration testing is just testing a couple software modules or functions together as a group, as opposed to testing them individually, which is what we did in the last video. I left the link to the unit testing video I did in the description below. But in this case, we're testing functions as a group as opposed to individual functions, just to see if our entire integration works together. That's why it's called integration testing. And the most common type or most common example of integration testing is basically testing our APIs when we finally build them, testing our APIs to be sure that they pass all our tests. And we're not going to use just Jest in this scenario. We're going to be using something called Supertest. And Supertest actually helps us to test our APIs, and that's exactly what it's built for. It has a really, really amazing API documentation that we will go through very soon. Alrighty, so let's get on with the code. There's really not much to present here. But before we do that, be sure to have npm installed. To go to nodejs.org, get npm installed, and then let's get back and start with the video. Also make sure you have Visual Studio Code because that's the code editor that I am using in this scenario. You can use whatever code editor of your choice, but if you want to follow along with me, just be sure to use Visual Studio Code. Awesome, so let's get on with the code. Now, as you can see here, I have a not so empty folder here, just with a data. It's called data, and we have a books.json. But before I go into books.json here, what we're going to be building today to show you guys all about integration testing is a website, or not really a website, like a back-end API that has to do with books. So it's like a regular CRUD application where you can create books, search for books, update books, and delete books, right? So that's what we're going to be building, but we're going to be using a test-driven development scenario. I talked a bit about that in the last video. So in this case, we're going to be using books.json. Let me just go into it as our sort of database for this scenario. We're not going to be using an actual database like SQL or MongoDB. In this case, to keep things simple, we're just going to be using this and test our code accordingly in that respect. So right here is is an array of books that have the name property, the author property, and an ID. So we're going to be treating this file as a database of sorts to speed things up a little bit. But in production, of course, you want to use SQL or MongoDB or any other database of your choice. Awesome. So before we even get into the code or writing anything, we need to initialize our npm project. And to do that, we will say npm init and just add a flag of -y to just answer yes to all of the questions. And of course, you can check the Git repository, which I'll leave in the description below, to type all of this, to copy and paste all of these things in. So yeah, cool. So we have initialized our npm project now, and we want to go ahead and go into our package.json file. And what we will see in the package.json file is, just an empty project here. We want to install a couple of stuff, not really much at all, but just go along with me. To make our books API, we are going to need Express, So I'm just gonna say npm install express. We will also need express validator to validate our post body if you have any experience with building APIs. I'll walk you through every single um, step of the way. So I want to install these first of all, and this should happen pretty quickly. Awesome. So these are our application dependencies. Now I want to install our dev dependencies. So to do that, I'll say npm install -d, and I'll say jest. And this is our testing library that gives us access to the whole describe and it APIs that we talked about in the last video. And then we also want to install Supertest. And I'm installing this as dev dependencies because you won't really be using these in production, just for our development environment. So press enter. This will take a second. Awesome. So it's done now. So before we move on to create our server file, with everything installed, we just want to make some changes to our package.json to make things work a bit more well, seamlessly, basically. And one more thing I want us to install before I even tamper with the package.json, in case you don't have this package, no daemon, it's used to help make our development really quick, basically. So npm install, then we want to install this globally -g no daemon. It helps restart our process anytime we save to prevent us from needing to close and restart our process every time. So just install this. I already have this installed globally, so I wouldn't do this, but in case you do not have this installed, please do the needed. Awesome. So now to modify our package.json a little bit, I just want to add a couple of stuff here. Since we're going to be testing, I want to change this test here, this string here, the value, and call this jest. We saw this in the previous tutorial. Watch all, so that we call our jest software, our jest program, to look for any file that's labeled .test.js. Awesome. So we also want to put a start script as well, and this will be node. We're going to create a file soon called index, and we want to write a dev. Script as well, and the dev script will say no daemon index. Awesome. So we have our scripts ready. But one final thing I want to sort of do here, because of later, if we don't do this and we have some issues in our test, in our project setup, I want to set a jest property here. We didn't see this before, but you can set certain jest properties to make jest act a certain way. If you go through the jest documentation, there are a lot of things you can add in the package.json. But for this, I just want to add a key called module path ignore patterns, and I want to ignore put this in an array books.json. So I want to ignore the restart of the jest process whenever I save this books.json, because what happens is if you write to books.json, like we're going to do in the next few minutes, it's going to restart the jest process and it's going to keep on writing to create an infinite loop. But we won't, we'll go through that later. I don't want to go too much into this, but just make sure that you have this jest property put here just in case you have issues like that. Awesome. So now we can move on to the actual code, guys. Let's create our index.js file. So for our index.js, we want to create a regular Express application, right? To do this, it's pretty simple, nothing much to it. So we just say const express is equal to require express. And this express helps us to create our Node.js API. Of course, there are other packages, third-party packages that help create APIs seamlessly in Node.js as well, but Express is just the most popular, so we're going to stick with using the Express API creator package just to illustrate the use of Supertest. Awesome. So we just say const app is equal to then express. We need to execute the express package and save it in the app instance here. And we also want to say app.use here, and create a middleware, add a middleware rather, and this will be express.json to allow us to post JSON JSON objects to our API here. If we don't add this, we won't be able to get anything posted by a user in the request body property. So we want to say app.use. In this case, we want to make this a very clean file. So we don't want to write our routes here, like saying app.get and whatever. We want to separate our routes in a different file. So I'm gonna create a file soon, but let me just write this down really quickly. I want any request to /API/books to go through my routing file, which I'm gonna call book route. I'm yet to create this route file. I'll do that in a second, but let me go ahead and instantiate the process and say const port is equal to, in this case, 8080. And then finally, I'll say app.listen, and it's gonna listen on port 8080. And then when the server is served, I'm gonna console.log backticks and say listening on port. Then I'm just going to write my template port. Awesome. So this is our index.js, and this is all we're going to write here, or not technically all. We still need to create our book route. So to create our book route, I'm just going to reference it first here and say const book route. I'm going to create this folder really quickly, but let me just reference it here. It's going to be in the routes folder. And I'm going to call this, or I need to put a ./ first, rookie error, routes, ./ routes / I'm going to call this books.routes.js is what I'm going to call the file, but you don't need to add the JS here. You can just make it .route without adding the JS extension. And I'm going to create a folder called routes in the root directory, and I'm going to create books.route. The JS. So this is our route, pardon me, this is our route file, right? So we need to sort of just create some code here for our entire application to even start, because if we just start off our application like this, even though we reference our route file here, it's going to crash because there are no actual routes here. So I'm just going to write the routes really quickly. We need to bring in express to do that, of course. So express, require express here. And then we just have to say, we need to bring in the router property and say const router is equal to express.R router. And we need to execute this router function because it is a function and it exposes the router property here, the router type here, for us to access our routes. And I'm just going to create a dummy route here, a dummy get route here, and say router.get / and this / is the path that's we're going to access, and the next argument is our request and our response parameters. This is going to be a callback function for whenever a user hits this route here. And for now, I'm just going to say res.send to the screen a message that says working, just to be sure that we are properly connected. And of course, I want to then expose this route property. I say module.export is equal to router. Now we can import the router properly in our index file, which we have already done, of course, and we have used it as a middleware. So whenever the user goes to /API/books, it automatically hits this first route here. So this slash actually means /API/roots /nothing, or basically it's just going to go to this direct route here for the root route here. Awesome. So let us start off this API, this entire server. I'm going to clear my console, of course, and I'm going to say npm, in this case, run dev, calling this dev script here that gives us access to NodeMon. If I do this, I can see I get listing on port 8080. So we can see that this actually does work, right? But to be sure that our route is properly connected, I'm going to go over to my browser here and I'm going to type in localhost, in this case 8080 slash API slash books, to be sure that it's actually working properly. And if I press enter, I see I get this message working, to be showing that it's actually working properly for us. Awesome. So we haven't really gotten to testing yet. Let's us start trying to do that. And basically, we're not going to use this route. I just wrote this route, to actually illustrate that the server is working properly. To start with the entire testing operation, I am going to I'm gonna I'm gonna leave this route for a bit, and I'm going to create a folder called tests, right? And in this test folder, I'm going to create a file called bookroute.integration.test.js, right? I put that integration here because this is not a unit testing file. This is an integration testing file. It's just a way to make me and make anyone viewing my file to know that this is an integration test for the book route. Awesome. So this is a testing file. So we're going to write a couple of things here for our tests. And the first thing we sort of want to do here, we don't need to bring in Jest or anything because installing Jest, our Node.js understands that describe and it are for the Jest package. So the first thing we want to do here before we do anything, because we're testing the APIs, right? We want to actually bring in to create a sort of fake application here, a mock application is it's a better way to put it, that actually sort of mocks our application and everything we're doing here in the book route to be sure that it's actually working, right? So to do that, in the first place, we need to bring in express here as well. So we say const express is equal to require express, right? And we also need to bring in Supertest, which actually helps us to access this our mock API, which we will see shortly. So const, we say const, in this case, call it request is equal to require Supertest, right? Awesome. So the next thing we want to do is we also want to bring in our book routes because we need to actually write like a mock application here. We need to actually bring in our book route or whatever route we're going to be running our integration test on, because we are testing API routes at the end of the day. And to test API routes, we need to bring in the routes we are going to test. So we say const book routes is equal to require. In this case, we are in the test folder, so we want to go up one directory and go into the routes folder and go into the books.route file. Awesome. So the next thing we want to do, we're done bringing in our key files and programs. We're going to say const, and this will be our fake app is equal to, then we have to execute the express function again to actually create that app. And we need to put in all the middleware that the app is going to use for us to actually have access to it. I know this seems a bit weird, but this is exactly how it's done. We're creating an instance of the app of the server we're going to test. So we need to bring in the server. So to do this, we say to create a middleware for the server, right? To make it look exactly like our actual server. We'll say app.use express.json, right? To make it to accept JSON data from the client. And we say app.use again, app.use again, and we say we want to have access to slash API slash books, right? I think that's the same route we had here in index.js. And this route is going to then have the second argument of our route file here. So we have slash API slash books going to our book route, just like it is in our actual application. Awesome. So we have done all the necessary setup and we can begin to write our API tests. So the way I'm going to do this is it's going to be a test-driven method. And in this case, you can see if you follow what I do, we don't even need to use Postman to actually test our applications, right? It's a really, really cool process of testing our APIs without needing to use Postman. It's in this case, testing with Jest, we'll be sure that our integration is always going to work all the time, right? So to do that, the first thing I want to write here is our describe block. So I'll say describe. And this is going to just talk about our integration tests for the books API, right? And then the second argument is a callback function where we write our tests. And then to do our I'll name this as first of all, we want to do a couple of operations here. We want our API to do a couple of operations. The first operation, of course, we want the API to do is to be able to get all the books, right? And to do that, I'm going to write a test that says it's what's this? It should get, right? It should send a successful get request to slash API slash books, and success. This is just my naming convention for my test. So a get request to API slash books should lead to a success, and the success is get all the books, right? Cool. So this is going to be an asynchronous function. Let me try the regular function first and show you why it becomes an asynchronous function. So in this is the part where we actually make use of our Supertest package. Because right now we want to test that our get request to slash API slash books, which is our little route here, will actually give us all the books. Right now it doesn't. It gives us something dumb here, but it doesn't matter because we're going to write our test first, and then we edit our code to fit our tests, which makes sense, right? That's called test-driven development. So to do this, to make sure that we are able to write a proper test to our API route, we say await request, which is our actual Supertest package here, and is going to request. This request is actually a function that takes in, as you can see here in my suggestions, the app, the Express app we instantiated here, and then we can then append other methods to it, like get in this case. We're going to get slash API slash books, right? And doing this returns a couple of things here, which is what we are actually interested in. So what we want is we want to extract those things that's come with it, right? So we do a little bit of the structure in here. This gives us two results, this request to our slash API slash books. It gives us the actual result first, which is the body, and then it gives us the status code. It gives us a little bit more, but these are the only two I want. It gives us a couple more stuff, but it doesn't really matter for this tutorial. So I'm going to get the body and the status code, right? And for this test to pass, I'm going to expect my body to equal to something. And remember from our last tutorial, to equal is called deep equality. Is used to check the equality of reference types as opposed to primitive types, like the primitive types of JavaScript, right? The number, the Boolean, yada yada. In this case, since we're going to expect an object back, or basically an array of objects, an array of book objects, we want to do a deep equality to be sure that we get what we are expecting. And of course, we want the API to return every single book in this books.json file, which is our mock database. So we want it to look like the books.json file, this books array here in the books.json file, I mean to say. So basically, we expect our database to return to us an array containing something, right? So in this case, it's going to be, we're going to put an array there, and instead here will be, we'll put expect that array containing, and this will be, oops, my bad, there is no array out at the outside here. My apologies for that. It's expected array containing, and then there's an array inside here, and this is going to be an object in the array, because we have objects in the books.json array here. We have an object here, so it's going to be then expect dot object containing, right? And then we'll put in an object inside as the only argument of the methods.object containing, and this will then make sure it looks like the actual objects that we have in here. And what items do we have in here? We have the ID property that is of type number. So this is how we reference the number type. We say expect that any number. If any of these things look new by any chance, we covered a lot of all this stuff in our unit testing video. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description below, for you to check that out. And we expect a name as well that is of type string, and we expect an author, which is also going to be of type string. Awesome. So this is the first thing we're going to expect, an array containing an object containing these property and values. Awesome. So the next thing we're going to expect from this test is we're going to expect the status code to give us the success status code, which is 200. If you to brush up on your status codes, 200 or 201 means success. I think 200 means successful retrieval of data. 201 means successful update of data, right? So this is our test here. And you see that we're going to have an error if we try to run this file, because of course we're using the await syntax here. We need to put the async in this anonymous function. So awesome. So now we have written our first test successfully. So yay. Let's then execute our tests. Let me close this index file and this route file and the package.json file. No, I'll use that. Let me close the books.json file. Cool. Awesome. So let's run our tests. Our test will, of course, initially fail. Let me just write npm run test. Cool. So you can see that our test actually does fail, right? If you read through this, it's showing a lot of red text here. Don't be scared of this, right? It's really easy to understand. It's just saying that it expected to receive an array containing an object containing all this author ID and name, which is what we actually put into our code, but it received message working, which is exactly what we have in our route file. If I could go there really quickly, this just returns message working, which is not what we want. We want to get our list of books, right? Exactly. So of course the test will fail. So how to make the test not fail? We need to actually work with our API. So I'm back on the routes folder in books.route.js. I'm going to take this out and just basically bring in my books, right? Const book data, right? It's equal to, I'm just going to bring in the file directly. We're going to go up one directory to the data folder, and then we just access books.json. Awesome. So what we just want to do to make things like really simple is say res.json or res.send. It doesn't really matter. Book data, right? And if I save this, it should then pass. Awesome. So our test has now passed here, as you can see at the this window here. We'll see one test suits, one passed, test, one passed. Awesome. So everything's looking green and happy. Awesome. So we wrote our first integration test. So this is a really, really big deal, guys. I'm glad we all did this together. Awesome. So now we want to go into the is something a bit more complicated, which is not really complicated. It's really easy, right? It's nothing, not so much to it really, to be honest. So I want to then write a post request to actually add a book to this books.json array here, right? Um, Basically, to do that, the best way to do that is to first of all write the test before writing the code, right? But um, I'm going to make use of a couple of things here. I'm going to make use of express validator. So we're just keep watch for that. So to make this, what I usually like to do, I like to test for failures first when it comes to posting things to the database or posting things to my server rather. So I'm going to write the failure case first, right? The failure cases first, right? Um, the first thing I want to do is say, give me a second here. Let me go to my integration test file here. And I want to write another test that says it's going to be a post request, right? And it's going to post to /API/books. We have not created this route here. Again, we haven't created this route. So I just want to test for failure, then tackle the failure first, right? So basically, I want to test for a failure on invalid post body, right? So basically, to add a name here, we need to pass in the name. To add a book here, I need to pass in the name property and the author, right? So if we want to write a test where the user doesn't pass in one property, for example, or the property is say empty, how will that actually look? So what we want to do is to say this is going to be an asynchronous function as well, because we're going to be accessing the application using async await syntax. Then we say const. Of course, this is going to be the structure to get the body and status code. Await, request, and we'll pass in the app as well. And in this case, instead of the get request, we want to send a post request to /API/books, right? But also, we also want to send in some data, some JSON data. So there's another property that I have not shown you guys yet. So I'm going to say it's called the send property, right? The send, not property, the send method, I mean to say. And this send method carries in what data you expect to be carried in. Ideally, and we're going to write the test case for success, but ideally, for the success test case, we want to have a name that says whatever the name is and an author that says whatever the author is, right? But in this case, I want to say pass in only the author, right? Or maybe just an empty string for the name. And we don't want an empty, we want an actual name for the book. I'm just going to pass in the author as maybe John Travolta or whatever, right? So obviously we want to actually the structure to get the body and the status code. So to do that, we're just going to say body here and status code, right? So the first thing we want to do if we pass in wrong data is we expect the status code to actually, oh, what am I writing here? 1 second. Expect status code, if I can type, to be, which is a primitive equality, to be 400, because I want my database to return 400 when the data, well, on my server, I mean to say, to return a status code of 400 when the data is invalid, right? In this case, the name is empty, and I want to prevent the name from being empty. So to do this, I expect it to give me 400, right? And I also expect the body to give me a certain error schema, and the body is going to, in this case, is going to give me something similar to what we did in the get request, but not the same. Just it's going to be an array with an object that has a property, right? So in this case, it's going to give me, I'm going to say to equal, and this is going to be equal to actually it's just going to be an object, not an array, basically, at least not yet. It's going to be an object that has a property called errors, and this errors is going to have a key, a value of an array that has our list of errors. And this is a very common schema with the Express Validator package, npm package, right? And it usually returns it returns errors in this exact same schema. So I'm using this for our tests. So I'll see the location usually is called body. And in this case, if I didn't pass in the name property, I'm going to say the message has a name, the error message rather is going to give me something like book name is required. And I'm going to set book name is required in my API when the name is not provided. So I'm going to expect it to give me this error schema that says location body, which refers to our request body. Message book name is required, and then the param is of course the name, which is this name property here. So this is the general schema, and then the final one here is value, which is going to be empty. We'll see where I put this very soon when I log out the error that Express Validator provides us, right? So this is exactly what I expect my the failure error code, the failure scenario rather, to give me. If I save this, of course the test is going to fail, because as you can see here, the first thing to fail is this. We expect the status code to be 400, but we get a 404. And we get 404 because we have not created the route, right? We need to create the route to make this test pass, of course. So the first thing we want to do is go back to our route file to sort of imitate this file here, to imitate this what we expect to happen in our test file. So to do that, I'll say router.post, and this is going to be a post request to the exact same route. And then I'm going to write request and response and this. Awesome. So we've created our post route. So the next step, of course, is to write our post function. And to do this, to make our post to check for invalid entries by the client, we are going to bring in our Express Validator package. So to do that, I'll come to the top here in line 5 and say const, and I'm going to destructure the properties here in a second, but I'm going to bring in our Express Validator. Awesome. So this is I'm going to bring in check and another one called validation result, which are both functions or methods of the Express Validator here. Awesome. So I'm going to write this as a single route middleware, which is a middleware that only affects a single route. And there's going to be a list of middlewares here. If you are, I know a lot of you may probably be able to use this Express Validator or have some experience with it, but for those that may not, I'm going to take this as detailed as possible. So basically, this checks for invalid entries by the client, as I said earlier. So I'm going to check, right? I'm going to use the check method here, or in this case, the check function here. It's going to check that there is a name property, right? Because as you can see here in the left of my screen, we're sending both the name and the author property, right, for the integration test file. So we're going to check whether there is a name property. Let me just close this to create more real estate. Awesome. So I'm going to type in the name, and then the error, if the name does not exist, is going to be book name is required, right? And I expect this name to not be empty. So I'll say .not is empty, right? This negates the is empty, and this basically spells out like check if the name is empty, right? So this basically just saying the name must not be empty. That's what this is just saying, like just reading it from left to right. Not is empty, and if it's actually empty, right, say book name is required. Also, I'm going to check that the author is not empty. So this is going to be the exact same thing. So I'm just going to copy this first line. But in this case, I'm going to say I'm looking for the author property. And I'm going to say author name, if I could spell. is required. So this is all that we have to do as regards the check function. Then the next step, of course, is to validate that we are actually whether or not we received an error. So to do that, we just say const errors is equal to validation result request. We pass in the request property to, and this validation result function actually checks for the request body to be sure that everything is as we stated properly in the middleware, right? And if it's not, then it populates this errors value here. So we need to now then check if the errors are actually, the error array is actually not empty. So we say, we'll put the exclamation points to negate our check and say errors dot is empty. Is empty is a method that Express Validator provides us to check if basically our request actually gave an error as defined by us in the middleware here, if the user actually entered an invalid property. So this is going to be an if check to check if it's empty, and if it's actually empty, we can move on. But if it's not empty, this if check will return something, and we have to return that an error has occurred, right? That there's actually an error here. So how we do that is to say return res.status, and in this case, we're going to return a code of 400, which is what we're actually testing for. Return a code of 400 here, and then .json to send our errors back to the client. And this is going to be our errors property here. And then we're going to send the errors array and say errors.array like this. So to have access to the error array, which is this schema of errors that we are actually expecting as defined by our test file here, to get this error array like this entire return, this is what we're trying to construct here. So the errors.array actually is the one that spits out this array that has the location, message, param value thingy here. Awesome. So if I save this now, before I save this, I just want to return something in case there is a success case, right? So, or no, let me just leave that. Let me just leave that, right? And that no need to return anything. So let me just save this. Awesome. So you can see that our test passed, right? It doesn't really give any log out, but to make things clearer, I'm going to log out what I actually get here in my test file. I'm going to log out the body so we see exactly how the body looks like. Obviously, we are sure of the body because our test passed, but just so you see that this is what we actually get from our request. If I save this, you can see that if I do consider log body, you can see this is actually the body we get. We get a value that is empty. We get book name is required, param is name, and location is body, as we rightly surmised here, right? So this works. At least our error case works. Now, what about our success case? Are we actually able to post a book here, right? Are we actually able to do that? To make that work, we need to then push the request body to the array of books in the book data here that we have in line 4. To make that work, we go to the next line after we checked whether the error array is empty, and we say book data.push, right? It's going to push in the name, the author, and in this case, we're going to just put in a random ID here. And to generate a random ID, even though this is not totally random, we say math.random, right? Just for our case, this is just okay. Awesome. So now this will work. This will actually push the book into this. And before I even complete this code, this is just an illustration. I want to write the success test case for this, right? And to do this, I am going to say, I'm going to create another test case here and say it, in this case, is going to be a post request again to the same route /API/books, and it's going to be a success test case. Awesome. So what is this success test case all about? We want to then have our regular async function, and by now you should be getting pretty used to this. And this async function should have the same structure as this. So I'm just going to copy and paste this from the previous test case and paste here just to speed things up a bit. And in this case, I'm going to add an actual name and say, instead of this, I'm just going to say author is, I don't know why I called it, okay, I'm just call the book name Face Off. I don't know, Face Off or whatever. So it's basically trying to send this to the to our API, and I expect, of course, the status code to be 200 because 200 means success, and I also expect to receive something from the body, right? So I expect the body to, in this case, equal just a regular object that says message success, right? Something simple, right? Of course, this test will fail, and it'll even time us out for a bit. It's still running the test because we haven't even sent anything to the client at all. So it's kind of weird. So to make this actually work, let's just go ahead. As you can see, the test is even failing here. So let's make this work for all of us, shall we? So to make this work, basically, we need to, as I've done here already, push book data, push this actual item here into book data. But we need to do more than that. We need to actually then update the file in books.json. We need to update this books.json file, and we're not updating it right now, right? So in this case, after pushing this, we need to write a function that actually enables us to save this into this new book data instance after we've pushed this new item into the file. So to do that, I'm going to write a function in a different file that will require us to just say save, and it will update the book data, right? This function isn't created yet, but I'm going to create this shortly. And to do that, I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call this helper functions, and I'm going to create a folder here called save.js, right? So this is going to be a folder called save.js, and in this folder, I'm going to create a function. Or you know what? I'm just going to rename this to services. It makes more sense since it's actually a service. So I'll call this services, and I'll call this save.services.js. Doesn't really matter, just my own personal preference. Awesome. So I've created save.services.js, and in this function, we're going to require a couple of stuff. I'm going to bring in the fs module, which enables us to write into a file in Node.js. It's a core module, meaning that we don't need to install it to use it. It comes with Node.js ready. Awesome. So the next thing I want to do is say path, which is equal to is another core module of Node.js, which enables us to form paths easily without needing to do something super complex, right? It's a really, really cool, helpful module. So it's going to require path, and I'm going to then write my save function. Let's say function save, and I'm going to write a couple of things in this function. But first of all, I want to, this save basically uses the new book data instance to update the books.json file. So it's going to have the book data as an argument here, as we rightly passed it in our route file in line 33 here. So this book data that's been updated is what we're going to receive in this function here. And to actually update this, I'm going to write a try catch block in case there are any errors. And I'm going to make use of the fs module here and say fs, and I'm going to write book data into a file. To make that work, I'm going to say fs.write according to what I want to do on the write the file. So I'm going to say write file sync. This means I'm going to write into the file synchronously, right? Without using the callback function write file method. This makes things a lot simpler for us, basically. So what write file sync does is it takes in the path property and then the item we want to write into the path, the file path. And to make writing this path easy, we're going to make use of the path module, I'm going to say path.join. What path.join does, it helps us construct our path. And we want to construct our path from this save directory here, this save services file, I mean. So to make this work, the first thing we want to do is we want to reference the directory that we're in, right, which is the service directory. So I'm going to move from the service directory, right, by writing underscore dir name. Just follow me here. It may seem a little bit complex, but it's really understandable. So I want to move from dir name up one directory. So I'll put a comma here and then a string of dot dot, indicating that we are creating a path one directory above. So we're going to start with the current directory, then move up one directory. Then we enter into the data directory, and then we want to access books.json. So this is pretty easy to understand. We're in our current directory. We want to move up one directory into the data directory, then books.json. Easy. So this is path.join into this comma-separated list of items that build our path for us. And then to the next parameter of this write file sync function is the actual item that we want to write. But remember, book data, I mean to say, is actually an array, an actual array, and we want to convert it into a string. And to make that work, we need to say json.stringify, right, to convert the array, or basically any JSON looking data, into a string to actually write it properly into a file. If we don't stringify this, it will throw an error and it wouldn't work, right? So we want to stringify the book data, right? And then this is all it takes to write in a file. But I put this in a try catch block because this may fail if we're given an invalid book data. So in case it fails, I want to just return false back to indicate that this function actually failed. But if it successfully writes this synchronously, writes this new book data into the books.json file, I want to return true to indicate a success. In another word, of course, we would want to run a unit test on this to be sure it works. So basically, we're not going to do that in this video, of course, because it'll be way too long. So I'm just going to export this file, this function, hoping it is going to work. So it's going to be save here, what is the export equal to this object, and save to be sure that it's exported properly. Awesome. So going back up, we're going to bring in the save function. So const, and we exported this in an object. So we're going to destructure it and then require it, right? So we're going to go up one directory, go to services, and then go to save.services, right? Awesome. So we have our save function with us here. So we're going to then call it and pass in the new book data in here to then rewrite this file to give our updated book here, the new book that the user has added, or our test module here has added for us. Awesome. So what I wanted to do is, since this save function actually returns a boolean, I want to save that boolean in a variable, right? To be sure that it actually does complete the operation. So I'll just create a variable here called is saved, and then pass in save this reference to the is saved function. This returns a boolean. If it saves, it returns true. If it doesn't save, it returns false. So I'm going to then say if, and it's almost done here. If it's saved, then return res.status. If it's not saved, I mean to say, if something happened in a database, the database is messed up. If it's not saved, then return status maybe 500 to show that there's actually an error, and then just send error true and message could not save book, or db down, or whatever you want to write here. We're not really going to test for this scenario because it's a db scenario. We don't really want to write tests for this. Then if it's finally saved and we're sure it's saved, we just want to say res that's JSON, and then we just return what we are expecting here, which is of course message success, right? So I'm just going to say message here and success. Awesome. And that is our post request. So let's save this to be sure it works. And we are still having a failure case here. Okay, just looking at the issue here, I can see that actually what actually happened here was I didn't really bring in name and author here. I just referenced it. That was an error on my part. What you want to do, I'm sure most of you already saw this, instead of just pushing nothing in here, that's why I threw an error. I want to actually extract the name and author from the request body using ES6 syntax, and just have this here, and then this should work pretty fine. Awesome. So the test has passed now because it had an error here for a second. So now it's actually saving it properly into the file. And let's just look at this and see that our books.json has actually changed. And then we have face of John Travolta in here with a random ID here, which is generated by math.random. Awesome. So we have our get and post requests. Awesome. So we're gonna do an update request, an update API route here, and to make this update work, just to speed things up, because I know you guys pretty much have figured this out by now. To speed this up, I'm just going to write maybe a few, not all the failure functions, just a few failure functions, just to make this video not. So to write the update tests here, I'm just going to write a failure request for when the book is not found, for example, and say, and this is, of course, it's not going to be a post request, it's going to be a put request, right? Because put requests are basically REST language for updates, right? So this is going to be to API slash, then this symbol here, this column symbol, then book ID, just to show that this is going to be a dynamic value sent by the client, indicating our book ID. And I'm going to write a failure scenario here. Failure when book is not found. Awesome. So this is the second argument is going to be an asynchronous function. And what I'm gonna have here is, the same request structure, and I'm just gonna copy this and paste this because I'm lazy to save time as well. And this is gonna go to /API/ of course, this is an error here. It's gonna be /books/book ID. So I'm gonna send this, of course, to /books/3, right? Or in this case, I'm going to test for a failure. So I'm going to look to update an ID that does not exist. In this case, I'm just going to write 5,000 because I'm sure that 5,000 does not exist in this JSON file. And to make this work, basically, I'm just going to say, I'm going to pass in just new values here, right? And give me a second. I'm just gonna say love me like you do as the book name. Let's leave John Travolta, he's on a roll here. So I'm gonna look, what this is trying to do right now, this API request is trying to look for a book with the ID of 5,000 and then update its, even this name and this author. But we're gonna expect it to fail, right? And give us an error of book not found, basically, which is what should ideally happen. So the first thing, of course, is to expect that the status code is going to be 404. 404 just basically means resource not found. Of course, it's going to give us 404 now because we haven't created the API, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to expect something else to be sure that our test actually passes. And we're going to expect the body to equal, in this case, an object that says error true, right? And message will be book not found. Easy. So To make this work, if we save this, obviously, it will give us an error, and the error is in the put block here. And book not found, it's telling us that it expected a value here. It's giving us an empty object, yada yada. So we're gonna have to create this API route, right? So to do that really quickly as we possibly can, we go to the route file to create the put route. So I'm just go here quickly and just minimize this for a second, and then say router, in this case dot put, because we're creating a put route, and this is going to put to book ID in this scenario here. And of course we're going to have our request and our response, and then we want to get basically our request params and say const, in this case book ID is equal to request.params, to get our parameter passed in here, this book ID, because we be sure that this book ID parameter is the same name as this book that we extracted via this ES6 destructure in process. Also, we want to get the name and author passed in. So get the name and get the author. This is equal to request.body, of course. And then we want to check whether the book exists in the book.data array, right? So the book data array, I don't know why I keep saying book.data. So to check whether the book exists, we're just going to write a simple array search function, right? So we're going to say const found book is equal to book data dot, in this case, we're going to use the array method called find, and this to use this to pass in an anonymous function here that takes in the argument of the actual book instance for every instance of the array, and the index, well, we're not going to use the index in this case, so we're going to leave that out. So this is going to return a function. In this case, it's going to return an object that contains the book ID we're looking for. So every item of this array has an ID property, and we want to check if that ID property is equal to the book ID that we're looking for, which has been passed in the params here. Awesome. So if this book ID does not exist here, if this book ID that we're looking for does not exist in this book data, we are going to say that's if found book gives us null, right? Because that's what it'll give us if it doesn't exist. We're going to return a 404 error, right? Let's say res.status 404, and then we're going to send the actual, what we're actually expecting here, which is an error of true, an error property of true, and a message that says book not found. If we save this now, this is going to, it still fails. Oh, cool. To make this work, of course, let me see why it's failing, basically. It's a put request, yada yada. Give me 1 second. Okay, I just spotted why it's not working, and the reason is pretty simple, because of course this is a put request and I didn't change post to put. So if I change post to put here, I expect it to run successfully, right? Awesome. I just did a little playing around here, right, just to check whether or not it's working. So my apologies on that. That was a simple fix. Awesome. So it's working properly now, and I don't know if you'd noticed, but of course it keeps on adding new properties here when we run the test every time. We'll address that later. So basically, our first error case is working properly, right? So all I want to do now is say, let me go quickly here and then write our success case, right? So the success case is gonna look like this. Let me just copy and paste this real quickly. Okay, and it's gonna be a success case, right? Successfully updated book, right? And of course it's going to have a lot of all this stuff. And then in this case I want to update the book with ID 3 or ID 2 basically. ID 2, let's go with ID 2 in this case. Awesome. So we want to, I think the book with ID 2 here is called Charlie Bronzy. We want to change this author name to basically anything basically here. So going back to here, we want to say, instead of Charlie Bronzy, I want to say Jack White, and then pass maybe I want to let me just leave the name like this, right? Let me okay. I'll call this, I'm bad with names. Let me say hello world basically. So I want to send a request, a success request basically, a success put request to the update API, and then I expect this to give me a 201 response to show that it has successfully updated the resource, right? And then I expect the body to give me a basically to give me what I pass it in, right? It give me the new things that I pass in, and of course the ID as well of 2, and in this case, right? So this is what I expect the body of this request to equal. If I save this, of course I get an error because obviously I don't get a response of 201, right? I receive something completely different. Yeah, so basically I need to make this work out properly, right? So let me save this, of course. Awesome. So I need to work on the put request here. And to make this work, actually, give us a proper response, we need to, give me a second here, we need to actually update the book array, basically. So to work on this, we need to then say if, right? If found book, we already checked for this here, we want to then update this found book, right? As easy as that. And to do that, we need to have access to the books array. So we want to create an updated books list from the books array. So to do that, we say const updated books is equal to, in this case, book data. And we want to actually update this book data array. So say .map. Bear with me here. And of course, the map loops through every item in the book array. And for every book, we want to say if the book ID of the current book in my loop is equal to the book ID property. And I just noticed I don't want to do a deep equality here because it's going to check for the type of the JavaScript's type of this, and the book ID here is a number, but everything that comes into the API request in Node.js comes in as a string. So I want to make this a double equal as opposed to a triple equal, and that's why we're getting a 404 error here for our test. We're meant to get not 404 basically. It's meant to just time out, but I'll get into that later. But this is just like a common gotcha here. Just make this a double equal as opposed to a triple equal. Awesome. So in this case, I'm going to do the exact same thing here. If book.id is double equal to the book ID, I want to then create an updated book instance, right? I want to then update the book, and I'll say, and what I'll do in this case is I'll say let updated book, right, is equal to null. I'm going to save an instance of the updated book outside of this map method here so that I can return this back to the user when the whole API process is done. So what I want to do here is I want to say updated book in this case is equal to a new object where I'll spread the current book property. This current book item here. I'll spread this book here, and then I will say I want the name, the new name property, to be equal to the name that I get from my request body, and I want the author property to be equal to the author that I get from my request body. Or to make this, ES6 compliant, I can just take out similar names for the key and the value in a object literal. Awesome. So once I save the instance of the new book, right, I want to return the updated book instead of returning the regular book in the map array, which means it's going to return, if the book ID is equal to the ID we want to update, it's going to return the updated book in that position in the array as opposed to the original book. It's a bit confusing, but I'm sure I'll try and go through it again before the end of the video. But basically, it's just, if the book ID is equal to the book parameter here, save an instance of the updated book based on what the user enters, and then return that book in the position of the array as opposed to what was there before the update happened. And then we want to, if this condition is not met, we just want to return the regular old book here. Awesome. So this is our update method here. And then we have our updated books. And again, we want to actually then save this in the database and say const is saved is equal to save updated books. And basically, I want to write this exact same logic as in the previous API route. So I'm just going to copy this and just make a few changes. I'm going to copy this, yada yada, make a couple changes here, then copy and paste this here. And instead of writing book data here, I'm going to write updated books. So it's just going to save the updated book with our save function. It's going to save it to the books.json file. And if it's not saved, return an error. But if it's saved, return success. And to be sure that this actually matches up with our thingamajig right here, we want to, instead of returning success, we want to return the actual updated book, right? So I'm going to return, instead of this, I'm just going to return res.json or res.send updated book without the s. Awesome. So this should actually give us a good result, hopefully. And we have a failure. Why do we have a failure? And that is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. We're expecting a status code of 201, but by default, Express gives us a status code of 200. So we want to set that to 201, and we should be all good now. 201 means successfully added resource. Awesome, awesome, awesome. We're getting somewhere. So now our success case is, well, successful, and if we actually check this out here, we see that we actually have Hello World and Jack White here, as opposed to what we had before. If we just take this back a couple of times ago, we see we had Charlie Bronsley and Love Like No Other. Let me run my test again. You see that changes, and we then get, one second, I think I did a console. I did a Control Z by mistake. So let me just save this again. And this is gonna turn into Hello World and Jack White. If I save this, I'll see for ID 2, I get Hello World and Jack White, as opposed to Charles Bronsley and Love Like No Other. Awesome. So I want to write a final test. This video is going on very long. So I just want to write a final test and say, it's going to be a deletion test to complete our entire CRUD application, which is what I set out to do, and darn it, I'm going to make it work. So I'm just going to write a final test here, which is going to be our deletion test, and then we'll call the video a day. And I want to just write a single failure test, of course, for the deletion test here. I'm just going to say it, and in this case, it's going to be a delete route, and it's going to be to /API/books/ again book ID, because we're going to delete by the ID, and then we're going to say write another failure event for when the book is not found. Okay, and we're gonna get a failure when the book is not found, and it's gonna be pretty much almost the same as this one. So we're gonna do a lot of copy and pasting here to speed up the development. So the second argument is going to be an asynchronous anonymous function, and we're going to make just going to copy the failure for book not found for the put request. I'm just going to copy everything here and paste it in our delete request for a failure for when the book is not found as well. And then we're going to look for the same 5,000 book. And in this case, we're going to use, instead of .put as the method, we're going to say .delete, right? So I've seen a couple of stuff. I've seen get, we've seen post, and we've seen put, and now I've seen delete. And we're not going to send any data because we don't send data when we delete. The parameter is already passed in here. Again, we expect to get an error of 404 and a message of book not found. Awesome. So this is what we expect to get. If we save this, of course, we're going to get an error here because it's the route is not found, and we're not expecting the error for the book not found here. So let's quickly write up that route. The first thing I want to do to make the route sort of alive is say router.delete, because it's a delete request to book ID, and this is going to have request and response, and I'm going to do a lot of copy pasting here as well. I'm going to, from the previous put request, I'm going to grab the book ID, the name and the author. I'm going to leave that out basically, but I'm going to grab the entire found book logic here. So I'm going to copy the book ID and paste in here. I'm going to copy the found book logic here and then paste in here as well. And we're going to get much of the same thing. So if I save this, I'm going to get all successes because this is entirely the same logic as the update route here. So let's write finally the success route for deletion, right? So if I come here, let me just copy paste this to the bottom. If I come here, I want to then delete whatchamacallit, the book here. Awesome. So I want to delete an actual book, and it's going to be book 3, right? And I expect to get 200 or 201 to be sure that it's correct, something that's been updated. And then I want to get just a simple message success, right? If I save this, of course, this is going to even time out because I'm not sending back anything in my request, right? It's going to time out and not give me anything, basically. So I'm not sending back anything if there's a success case, so it's just going to time out. Okay, so I want to then do that, and to make that work, of course, I need to actually edit my book data to delete that item from my book data. So I'll say book data, right? Or I'm going to say const updated books is equal to book data, which is we're getting, of course, in case you're not following, we're getting it from line 4, the book's JSON file. Book data, in this case, we're going to use the filter method to delete the actual book that the user wants to delete by the book ID. And it's going to have the book instance, and then it's going to say filter for the book ID not equal to, or in this case, regular non-deep equality here, the book ID, right? That is passed in as a param. So what this is saying is, I want my book data to only have all the books that are not equal to book ID passed in the param, right? So that's just what this statement is saying. So now we have our updated books. We then want to save it. And again, we will copy our save logic here. And just copy this from the previous put request and then paste it below. And this is exactly what we want here, except we don't want to pass in updated book because we have no updated book here. In this case, just want to pass in a message of course, success. I save this. Of course, everything is successful, but when I save this again, I get a failure. Why do I get a failure? Because once it's actually edited the deleted the ID of 3, running the test again expects to see ID of 3 there, but the ID of 3 is not there, right? So it's not going to work. It's going to fail. So how do we resolve this? We need to make use of a function that we learned before the in the previous unit tests that we did, and that is called it's called before all. So I'm going to run a function before all to re-update my books.json, right, before every single test, so that I have the items there as I expected. So I'm going to write a before all, and this is going to have an anonymous function that executes before every single thing, and I'm going to bring in the save function. So I'll say const save is equal to require, go up one directory, go to data, and then go to books.json, and this should be the final act for the whole show. Let me just Control Z all this back to the original state, and then copy this, right, and paste it here as the, I'm just call this init data. Const init data is this, and I'm gonna then say save init data. And this is wrong. I shouldn't have brought in save as this. Of course, save is not this. Save is actually services, my bad, and save.services. My apologies for that mistake. So this is going to take in this data and then write it into the file before every single test runs. Awesome. So let's save this and see what we get. We still have an error here. Okay, the error here is saying save is not a function, and that is true because save is not a function. We need to pass this in and save. Awesome. So it's actually being extracted from the function in an object, so we need to destructure the save option there. Awesome. So we can see that the test passed, and when we save it again, the test still doesn't pass. Odd. Now, doing the before all right now, doing before all doesn't really solve the problem, even though it seemed at first that it will solve the problem. Taking a more deeper look as to the way Jest actually works, it doesn't really, this before all doesn't really allow the write to file property to be done, the write file function to be done before all the items here run. And the problem with that is we are trying to access the book with the ID of 2 before before it actually writes everything back to file. So before all, even though it seems like an ideal choice to save our data to the data to the books.json file before we run our tests, we fail upon the second reload of our tests. So if before all does not work in this scenario, what then does work? Thankfully, the team at Jest made an adjustment, made a couple of helpful methods to help us to write things into files before we actually start tests. And that I'm just gonna take this out, comment this out, basically, and and that is called it's called the mock method. And what the mock method does is it writes mock data into a file before the Jest functions run, right? So we do this by saying jest.mock, and in this case we are in our test file. We want to go up one directory to our data file, then into books.json, and then the second argument of the mock, the first argument takes the path, the second argument of the mock method takes a callback function that then returns what value, what basically data we want to return in our JSON file. And in this scenario, we want to return this exact array here. Just copy this and then paste it here before I uncomment. Yes. So this is exactly what I wanted to return. I wanted to return an array of the books here. And for that, since I'm doing that, I'm going to cancel this out. So what is going to happen here is going to run this first and wait for the write to file function to be done first, the Jest write to file function to be done first, before it then runs all of these tests that are here. So right now, if we save this, we see that we're going to get success no matter how many times we run the test here. And that concludes our Jest integration test special. And one other thing I need to state, we're seeing this process here running at the left. We don't even need this to run to make our application, our test-driven development work. We can still save this, and we get our test being passed, and we can still work with our API without even needing to run our process on this port 8080. It's really, really cool that way. And to make things cleaner, I'm just going to take out the save services method, since we're not using save anymore with before all. I'm going to save this, and that is all. And we covered quite a lot here, but I'm sure if you go through all the videos, you will be able to properly understand and reinforce your understanding of all that I have been talking about for a while. So I'm going to end the video here. So I encourage you guys to leave a like and subscribe if you like this type of content. And I'll see you guys in the next one. And next one, I'll be talking about end-to-end testing with Puppeteer and Jest. That one will be a lot less intense than this one for sure. But this one is it was requested by one of the people in the comments. So that is why I decided to talk about this as extensively as I did. So if you like this type of content, please don't forget to leave a like, and please subscribe, and goodbye.